Art can hold memory in ways language cannot. It gathers repetition, inheritance, and revelation into physical form. For the artist Louise Bourgeois, the body became a site of memory, stitched, reassembled, and revisited again and again. Her work insists that what is hidden must surface, and that ancestry, relations, and culture shape not only how we live, but also what we pass on. What becomes of an artist's work when it outlives them? Does it settle into history, or does it keep unfolding into the present? And how do we distinguish between biography and legacy, the life lived and the meanings that resonate through the work? These are some of the questions we'll explore on Edge of Reason. A limited series podcast produced by Atlantic Rethink, the Atlantic's creative marketing studio, in partnership with Hauser Wirth, a home to visionary modern and contemporary artists. In this special episode, the first in our series to consider an artist's legacy, we turn to the estate of Louise Bourgeois. Joining us are Frances Morris, former director of Tate Modern, whose landmark 2007 retrospective brought Bourgeois' explorations of memory and the body to global audiences, and Jamieson Webster, psychoanalyst and writer, whose work illuminates how desire, inheritance, and interpretation shape the way we encounter art. Together, they reflect on the lasting resonance of Bourgeois' work, its patterns, its revelations, and the questions it continues to press upon us today. Frances, welcome to Edge of Reason. So you commissioned Louise Bourgeois for the inaugural installation of the Tate Modern's Turbine Hall in 2000. Two amazing pieces that most of us who know Louise Bourgeois' work already probably know about. Maman, the giant spider, maternal spider, and I Do, I Undo, and I Redo, three monumental tower structures that sort of encapsulate her approach to her work. And you've been credited as transforming Louise Bourgeois into a global art hero. I'm just wondering if you can take us back to the first time you saw a piece by Louise Bourgeois. How did it impact you?
I first came across Louise properly at the Venice Biennial in 1993. Amazingly, the same biennial that I first encountered Yayoi Kusama. So they became the two great women in my life and career in the art world. And I was completely captivated by Louise's work. She seemed to encapsulate so much of what I was interested in. And I was working on a survey exhibition for the Old Tate Gallery, working with a critic, Stuart Morgan. And our working title was Rites of Passage. It was like we were looking at emerging art at the end of the millennium, artists who are engaging with the AIDS crisis, a sense of kind of like existential precarity, emergent concerns around ecology, and the way that Louise's work focused on the sort of transitional moments in life, birth, childhood, puberty, relationships, felt so strong in terms of providing a narrative for the show. And in a way, that was the beginning of my encounter with her. I met her, terrifying meetings, totally intimidating.
Talk a little bit about that. You have to unpack that.
I arrived in Chelsea, in her brownstone, where she'd lived since the 1960s, a gorgeous, skinny house. And I knew her old studio was in the bottom. I mean, she was a legend already by the time I met her, and a very senior figure. But she absolutely was one of the most intimidating people I've ever met, right from the start. Absolutely no warmth, eagle eye, extremely upright. And one of the things I had to do, as we did in those days, was you would interview an artist when you acquired a work. The kind of like provisional interview, setting out what the work was about, its principal themes, because then you wrote a catalogue entry for the website. Halfway through the interview, she just said, no. I had no idea really what that no meant, but I just was completely gobsmacked. Anyway, I kind of got back on track. And then the next point of like, she looked at me and she just got up and walked out of the room. I mean, can you imagine? I had no idea what was going on.
Oh, no.
Anyway, I kind of escaped from the house, terrified. And I just put the interview in the back of the drawer and I never listened to it again until after she died. Then I was asked to make a speech at her memorial. And I thought, what am I going to say? I only have bad memories. Anyway, I found the tape, listened to it. It was brilliant. She was amazing. My questions were sharp, piercing. So weird, the passage of time. But I mean, in a way, that set the tone for our whole relationship over many years. I visited often, I never felt at ease with her, always felt put on the spot. She was absolutely brilliant and clearly way above my pay grade, intellectually, took no prisoners.
What an amazing story. Wow, there's so much to talk about in terms of her process and what the work means and how you've interacted with it. And I want to come back to that. But first, let's bring Jamieson in. Jamieson Webster is a psychoanalyst and writer whose work explores how the subconscious shapes what we create and perceive. She's the author of Conversion Disorder, The Psychoanalyst and the Artist, and On Breathing. She's long been interested in the work of Louise Bourgeois and has returned to it throughout her own writings and scholarship. Jamieson, welcome to Edge of Reason.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, Louise Bourgeois has become something of a muse for you in many ways, yeah?
I think so. I think it kind of appeared in the art world at some point. They beckoned to me. I wasn't entirely sure what they wanted from me, but I think it has something to do with the importance of her psychoanalysis and that she was in it for 35 years until her analyst died, and his place in kind of jump-starting her from a depression into making art is very, very clear, just in the timeline in which she came to write about it. And unlike a lot of artists, she was really a writer. It's not necessarily the case for all artists. She was a writer. She was a reader of psychoanalysis. She was a major diary keeper. And all of this is part of the foundation, and it's been digitized. So it's this incredible archive that can be searched. And the notes that she kept on her analysis and its relationship to the works that she made and how they came to her through a lot of her psychoanalytic process. So there's her artistic process and there's her psychoanalytic process really standing side by side. And there's just not another artist that I know of that has this kind of record and over the course of a lifetime. So it's really extraordinary. It's really unique. And some of this was documented in the show at the Jewish Museum, Louise Bourgeois, Freud's daughter, where they sort of also introduced psychoanalytic ideas, but through her and through her artwork and through some of the entries to bring it to the public. And that was the show that I first came in on to give a talk at and then to write for. And then I kept going. I wanted to use Bourgeois' conception of psychoanalysis and her artistic practice almost as a corrective to the psychoanalyst and to the popular conception of psychoanalysis. That was really important to me because many people think that, like Freud's ideas explain your life, but actually the work in analysis catalyzes the capacity to do something with your history and with your life as you live it. And the moment I think I fell in love with her was when I read a number of her dreams. And her dreams would always almost end in a sculpture, and you would see the moment that the artwork takes off. And whatever trauma she's reliving, whatever the anxiety is, whatever the various characters, whether it's her mother or her husband or her children, she takes that moment and somehow already turns it into a material form. And she has exactly what she needs to work with at that point. And you don't have to add any more meaning. You don't even have to analyze. It's as if you see the work of analysis and how it became a psychic embodiment that allowed her to work. And that's also why the work I do, I undo, I redo is so important to me in terms of the fact that what you're trying to get to is the capacity to do and redo and not understand. And she really, really disliked intellectualization, despite the fact that everyone says that she was so ferociously intelligent. She said, I distrust ideas. I distrust intellectuals. I distrust understanding. This was like music to my ears.
I wanted to come back to that in a second. Let's jump into the conversation with both of you. There's so much stuff that's so rich here to dive into. Let's start with this idea that you were talking about, Jamieson, of the I do, I undo, and I redo. Can you unpack that a little bit more for maybe first timers to Louise Bourgeois' art? What was she doing? What was she undoing? And what was she redoing?
Yeah, I have a great quote from her. She wrote, "The verbal's too easy and makes me anxious. To talk does not constitute a catharsis. It is the actual doing. A work of art is successful to me when it removes anxiety. This is the price we pay. The work of art is limited to an acting out, trying to get rid of things. It is not an understanding. If it were understood, the need to do the work would not exist anymore. Art is a guarantee of sanity, but not liberation. It comes back again and again." Her sense of the suffering in her life, whether it was the death of her mother, the death of her father, the difficulties that she had with her role as a woman, a wife, a mother, an artist, a professional, were sufferings that don't go away, but you can do something with them. You can work with them. And this is part of the doing, the undoing, the redoing. And also, I think what's so important about sculpture in her work, because one of the things she said is that a life is like a tapestry that's full of holes, which we know is a reference to the work of her family. But I mean, it was her sense of things, that it's things come undone, there's holes. You have to redefine the space. You have to figure out the edges of it. You have to recut it. You have to refold it. You have to remake it. But you're given the cloth that you're given to work with. And you really have this profound sense that she could only have been a sculptor for that reason. You know, there's something very beautiful to me in that style of reworking.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth saying for those listeners who aren't that familiar with Louise that the psychoanalysis that she underwent extraordinarily, in such extraordinary depth, followed a period of deep knowledge around psychoanalysis, but it only happened at the point of almost a sort of psychic breakdown in her life in the 1950s, by which time she was already a very noted and accomplished artist. She was showing in major galleries in New York. The Museum of Modern Art had already bought her art. I had no idea when I met her or came across her, and even when at the point where we did the major retrospective in 2007, we had no idea of the extent of her engagement with her psychoanalyst. In a way, it became her principal occupation for over a decade. But I think it's worth saying that even before that period, those thematics that then came out and were articulated both in her diaries, in the record of her dreams, and subsequently in a very visible narrative way in her late work, were already present right from the start in these tiny, extraordinary, delicate, little beautiful pen drawings from the 1940s. There's an extraordinary drawing of a woman giving birth, that birthing theme, which is so foundational in the I do. It's almost the beginning of the I do. I give birth. I give birth to an idea. I give birth to a child. I give birth to my death. It is present right from the start. And I think what actually Jamieson has helped me understand is how that underpins everything. It underpins her work as a storyteller, but it is also the way she works with materials, because over this long arc of a career, she never ceases to want to re-engage with the same ideas with very different means. And that's what's really interesting to me as an art historian, is that what is it about the flux of the moment outside psychoanalysis? What is it that determines the move from wood to latex? What then determines the move from latex to wax to marble, then from marble to iron, from the discrete object to the installation? And I don't think anybody's nailed it yet, that the conversation, the I do, the redo thing is very, very complex. It's not just about returning to her traumas, which she never lets go of. She needs her trauma, she needs her memories. She returns to them in a completely different guise, as if she's reinvented herself as an artist. Fascinating.
I wanted to ask, it seems to us now that her work is so steeped in memory. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how she gives form to memory. You talked about all of these different types of materials that she actually uses to capture these types of ideas that she's working with. But how does form change over time? And how does that move in relationship to the memories that she's trying to surface and contemplate in public?
Frances, I think you have a better sense of the arc of her work. You know, it has like a Rashomon quality, but without it being 5 different people, but with it being yourself. And that she reapproaches the same scenes over and over again and lets them shift like a kaleidoscope, either with materials or with the staging or with the affect that comes across in the work, if it's violence, if it's tenderness, if it's fear and anxiety, even playing with scale and with height. This is what I love, because you don't believe psychoanalytically necessarily in truth, capital T, or veridical truth, but you believe in subjective truth, small t, which means what's true for you at that moment as best that you can say and for that time. And you have to do this process of revisiting it again and again and again. And, you know, this drives people crazy. Why should someone pay for that? Why should one spend a lifetime on that? And really, one of the best answers is look at Louise Bourgeois, look at her work. Look at what that allows you to do. Look at the difference in tonality that's possible in revisiting something again and again in your memory.
The revisiting, it's coming back to your question, Jeff. The revisiting is a remaking. It's a really good question. How does she give form in multiple ways? She was also part of her generation, and she lived through decades in which the art world, thinking about materials, what was possible for an artist, changed in a very radical way. It's really worth remembering that she came of age when surrealism was not so old. The very first sculpture she made in New York in the late 1940s, early 50s, I feel very much of their era, although she would not probably have liked to have been connected with artists like David Smith and Giacometti. That's where the work was, is atelierated, totemic sculptures, crudely made from wood. I think they have strong connections with primitive votive objects she would have seen, voodoo objects, through Robert Goldwater, her husband, the great curator of primitive art, which was steeped in that moment in time.
You're referring to her work Personnage, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. These wonderful wooden upright figures that she placed in a curiously kind of theatrical spatial setting in her exhibitions, prefiguring, I think, her interest in space later on. But they're very much of that time. When she comes back to art in the 1960s, it is as if reborn, and she's working alongside contemporaries like Eva Hesse or even Kusama, though she would not have wanted that reference, with soft materials that only form themselves as a result of what you do, them clay or plaster, latex, wax, and the work becomes very organic and visceral, playing evidently with some of the similar themes. And then during the 60s, 70s, 80s, I think the works become more literary almost. It's almost as if psychoanalysis released her to describe the form in a more literal way. So once you get to some of the big late cells, like Passants Dangereux, which you theoretically should be able to walk through, art historians now can name the references. Oh, those are the chairs that hung in her father's loft in Antony that would have been repaired. This is the leg that represents her lame sister. And I find that slightly problematic, the kind of illustrative nature. And it's also interesting, I think, that later on, text comes really to the fore in her work. The early years, say 2 or 3 decades, it's about the emergence of idea through form, this incredible exploration of a whole range of different materials. But by the 80s, when she's kind of okay with being her Sisyphean life, she's okay with it. She makes this wonderful little tapestry. I've been to hell and back, and let me tell you, it was wonderful. She's almost confident with the trauma. She needs her memory. This is her life mantra. She's okay with it. And the work, in a way, becomes more complex in a material sense, but to my mind, almost less interesting in terms of there's less to hide later on. It's all out there.
Frances, you point out 1974 as a turning point in her career, after which she seems to, I think you put it, come out as somebody who's working with memory experiences in this storied life. Jamieson, as you're listening to Frances speak, what's coming up for you? How are you thinking about your understanding of Louise's preoccupations and her repetitions?
Well, I was thinking of the transition into the 80s and 90s about a confidence and a literariness, but also maybe a literalness that's also there. And I think it was very important in the Freud's Daughter show. The piece on the destruction of the father was very important. It's in 1974. And they wanted to position that as like a transition point into the next phase. And I guess the psychoanalytic idea would be that there was some kind of a conquering there. So this is the piece in which, the dinner table is laid out for everyone to eat the father. There's something important to me. It's a theme, obviously, throughout the work. I mean, you're saying from some of the earliest works, like the ink drawing of the woman giving birth. But the question of trying to rewrite psychoanalysis, which does become very literal at a certain point, or to rewrite her life within the very literal and stated themes of psychoanalysis. The destruction of the father being a very bold one, but even the Passage Dangereux and some of the other pieces, where it's literally the return of the repressed and so on. She does do something interesting, which is to try to rewrite the story from the perspective of women.
I mean, I always thought, interestingly, in terms of her material practice, I always thought that the going to Italy, Carrara, marble, in the 70s, after the destruction of the father, but is part of that taking on a man's world.
Yeah.
She's worked with soft materials and she's had a little studio, but she's up there. She's having dinner with Henry Moore. She's thinking about Michelangelo. Actually, I think she's taking on Rodin and she's taking on that legacy. She's putting feminism back into psychoanalysis because she wanted to occupy, she wanted to own the territory as a woman. There was nothing that she saw as outside her purview as an artist. I cannot think of any other artist in the course of the 20th or now 21st century who has engaged with so wide a field of sculptural discourse in terms of their materials or their techniques, their technology, the methodologies, or the way she manifests what is broadly her own mantra. But it's so diverse in the way she produces it. She sang sculpture. She made sound work. She made works that engage you physically, like the Great Towers. She made works you could only peep into. Very literal works, very abstract works, even like The Destruction of the Father. And it's been written about so much, but what are those great mammally things? It's still a complete enigma, that work.
She wrote this piece on Freud's collection, all the statues on his desk that everyone sees, called Freud's Toys, where she just reduces him to this silly little boy collecting things.
Yeah.
And then she has in the Passage Dangereux the father's collection of chairs hanging over the bed with an incestuous scene. So taking these men to task for their possessiveness and their collection and the way it mirrors the way that they try to possess the body of the daughter or the wife. But she was a collector. I mean, she was a hoarder. These contradictions are always there. And I admire them for being there and her letting them be there. And that being the source of the doing and the undoing and the redoing.
I think that tension is what creates the drama of the work. That you actually never get to the bottom of the well. You just never get there. We're very privileged because we come to the work with this background and this insight. And therefore, it's very easy for us to read a lot of what we're seeing as like an illustration of a long life and an experience and a family and the child abuse, as she called it. But for other people, these are just like curious, enigmatic objects.
The video that she has where she describes the scene where her father takes the orange and he peels it and he makes this completely humiliating joke about sexuality, basically, with the orange peel. And then she made the enigmatic artwork with the orange peel.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's just a story. I mean, you could understand psychoanalytically how that theme then reverberates. But even when she tells it, which is a video that they'll often play sometimes at certain museum shows, and she's there and she's peeling it, she's doing what the father did as she tells the story. And she says, and I cried and I cried and I cried. And the intensity of the affect on her face as she's reliving that moment. And
she's crying. She's actually crying.
Oh, she's actually crying in the video.
Yeah, she is.
And I think that the audience just understands that. They understand that there's the child, there's the artist, there's the repetition, there's the person making, there's the storyteller in her. And you don't need psychoanalysis anymore. I mean, forget it.
You said exactly what I wanted you to say, because a part of me thinks we don't need, I think it's extraordinary and it's there and it's like a separate body of work, but we don't need it. And that's the power of her sculptural work, is that we don't need it. We just have the objects, the enigma, the captivating drawing you in. And I do think the towers at Tate, one of the reasons they were so powerful is that you, as a member of the audience, you walked through them. Your body did what they said they were. You went up, you went down, you looked at yourself again. You went into another, you went up, you went down, you went around. You were doing, you were undoing, you were redoing. And I think she, in her very best work, she draws you in a very emotional, psychological, physical way. But the best of Louise's work was truly immersive.
Jamieson, you had a quote that you pulled from Louise Bourgeois in one of your essays, and I'm wondering if the two of you could talk about this a little bit. I wanted to read this quote. She said, "If I make 1, 2, 3, 4 statues in one series, it is because I must repeat myself to be sure that my messages reach you. We will have an accumulation of statues like grains of sand on the shore." It's beautifully poetic, and I'm wondering how that resonates for the both of you in this moment, looking back at somebody who's no longer with us, who passed in 2011, but whose work continues to be made and remade as we encounter her work in new ways.
I mean, I think we need her Sisyphean message right now. We're all a bit down about the state of things. And I was just thinking today, listening to several patients, about the idealization of like youth and precociousness and success and like making it and getting there and knowing what you want and getting what you want. And I don't know, she gives you a different picture of what's possible in a life, both making space for what's difficult and then the kind of energy that you can have. I mean, she says, my intensity is my devil, something like this. And, you know, this, that she'll make 1, she'll make 10, she'll make 100, she'll make an infinity, and she won't stop until she gets across what she feels she needs to get across. But it's very beautiful in that quote, because she also says, if you want it, I'll do it too. It's not just that she wants to do it, but she also wants to meet the demand of the other. And, you know, I don't know, at this moment when many people feel like giving up, I think it's a really important example.
I mean, I think there's also maybe it's a cliche, that repetition doesn't mean sameness. We live in a culture where everybody seems to be in pursuit of the new and the first time and the original. But actually, repeating can be a means of just deepening. And when you look at the repetition of her themes, and those drawings from the 40s, they go on resonating in the early years of the 21st century, but they're not repetitions. They're returns to the source, they're remakings. There is no repetition, in fact. And I think we should remember that never believe anything that Louise Bourgeois says, because she re-says it another time, or she says it differently. And when you look at something like that femme maison, which is one of my completely favourite motifs in her work, it's made in countless different formulas, whether it's a painting or an abstracted sculpture in plaster or a work in marble or it's a fabric work. It's not the same, but it's a rethinking, a returning to that very powerful idea, which obviously was a sort of deep, lifelong preoccupation. It's more like ebb and flow rather than repeat, I think. It's that cycle, it's a coming back, and every time the flow comes, it flows the shingle differently. That's, for me, the life mantra. Go for a walk, go for another walk. The sunshine will be out, it'll rain, it'll be a different walk.
That's a powerful way to end it, actually. Thank you so much to the both of you, Frances Morris, Jamieson Webster, for joining us on this episode of Edge of Reason.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I'm
I'm Jeff Chang, and you've been listening to Edge of Reason. Join us next episode for a special roundtable discussion on creativity in the crossfire, featuring Hauser and Wirth Curatorial Senior Director Alexis Lowry, with curators Hamza Walker and Lauren Cornell. Together, they explore how museums and artists are navigating censorship, polarization, and political pressure, and how creativity, care, and conviction endure, even when culture itself is under fire. If you've enjoyed what you just heard, please like and review Edge of Reason on Apple Podcasts and help us reach more listeners like you.